Thanks, Chick. So this is Bo, and I'm going to start, and I'll go over what we're going to do today, which is really give some context and just overall frames about how we see the issue. And I'm not sure if everybody's following along, but we're using the PowerPoint, so if it helps you, you can click on that and follow along. And then, so I'll do the context, and then Gajwa is going to talk about the organizing that's happened and how we came to terminology and analysis. And then Chai will talk about practices that best serve victims and survivors. And then we are hoping that there will be enough time at the end where we can take some questions and have discussion on the issue. So get started. So when we did this work, I just want to say that I think that there's a perception perhaps put out there that the Hmong community or Hmong women don't talk about these issues. And I want to say that that's absolutely not true. I've been in the community obviously all my life, but also having been a person that has cared deeply about women and girls issues, and really started my career working in the field of domestic violence, that it has really been the community that has come forth, and more specifically survivors and victims that have sought help, that has prompted the community to, in particular, the community of Hmong women to do something about it. And as early as 1979, the first Hmong women's organizations were created specifically to address women's issues. And so, people often wonder if Hmong women know what they want from this. And from my many years of doing work with the community, I would say that absolutely Hmong women are demanding for change, and to not just talk about us as Hmong American women, but to connect across the globe, and to say that we want more gender equity for Hmong women across the globe. And the slide is really a personal picture. It's from a trip to Thailand where a mother is sewing while her baby girl is sleeping, but the person on the right is my daughter. And, in discussions, ultimately, we all want the same thing for our girls, and that's really for them to grow up healthy, happy, and to be valued in society so that they can achieve their full potential. So our work is really about looking at this deeply and to talk about what kind of world we all are a part of, so that we can work on the tough issues. I think, can someone put their on mute? Sorry, I'm just hearing feedback, so I get tripped up myself. So with that as context for our work, I want to say that, oftentimes what we have heard and through our own lived experiences, many of the women that we organize with across the globe are not just advocates and community builders, but many of them are, and us, are also survivors. And so what we talked about in this organizing work is really understanding that Hmong women don't live one-dimensional lives, right? That there are intersecting power systems that have to do with patriarchy that causes misogyny and, the kinds of practices that are harmful to women and girls. That as an ethnic group that has experienced much atrocity throughout history for many centuries, race is a very important aspect of how Hmong women experience both service and care. And then also that as the world thinks about making money work, that becomes also a driver, and in particular, in this case, understanding also our newfound privileges of being American citizens and the value of American dollar as compared to other kinds of currency across the world. And then ultimately globalization and the opportunity for people to go where they want and things like that. So all these are issues that or are power systems that Hmong women understand deeply and live every day in the context of, and they undergird kind of the work that we have been doing. So all to say that Hmong women also are talking about not just disrupting behaviors that cause harm and abuse to women, but we think of our work really in terms of movement building, and that's really how do we challenge and intentionally disrupt the practices that are harmful, but ultimately how we need to be able to come together and talk about what is the new thing that we're trying to build. And oftentimes we have heard in these conversations where people are trying to be helpful and supportive of us, and often telling us that if Hmong women could just learn the rules or the laws, that whether that be the Hmong community itself or different systems in which we live, including the American system, that we would be able to achieve some liberation and equity. And we always say, what we're talking about is actually trying to build a world where there is gender equity, and it's about movement building and not just purely representational in terms of getting to the same place. And so that kind of world, we know that women all over the world don't have that yet, and that's what our work is trying to focus on. So for us, that really means what are the practices that we try to build across our network of leaders and organizers. And we talk about the deep change, and that means changing culture. We're not just talking about the Hmong culture, but also, the cultures in which Hmong women live, because each country is different. And so they have then their own kind of culture. And then, how do we also spend time to craft solutions that are about creating, shifting, and dismantling power systems that are abusive and cause harm to women and girls. And then also elevating that Hmong women are not just the victims in these situations, but that we have leadership. And we have been thinking about this for a long time and have ideas for what could change and how it is that we could build with the rest of the world to achieve gender equity. And then most importantly, it's really about building, for us, about building connections and what we call sisterhood across the globe, because we know that in one country, if we just mitigate the issue in the U.S., then what we have seen is that the message or what is talked about in terms of Hmong women is carried by men to other countries, and that is not what we want to happen. Women need to be talking to women, so building that thread is also very important. And so we spend a lot of time cultivating that, and that is why our movement is global. So I'm going to turn it over to Gajwa, and she's going to talk about the organizing work and talk about definitions and things like that. Gajwa?
Thank you, Bo. This is Gajwa. I'm in Madison, and I've been in this field of work, for the last 20 years. I'm hoping that today we can share a little bit of our lessons learned and a little bit of our experience in working directly with Hmong women and girls on this issue and how we came about even giving this definition, how we came about the definition, the strategy, the building of sisterhood, this organizing model that was very specific to those of us who were helping Hmong women and girls on the ground in Wisconsin, but has evolved and become a global movement. So a little bit about the work. In the state of Wisconsin, it's quite unlike other states. We are funded throughout the state to provide domestic violence and gender justice advocacy. So there's at any given time about 20 to 30 Hmong advocates throughout the state of Wisconsin that provides direct services and advocacy for Hmong victims and survivors. As we've been doing this work for a long time, in 2006, we had a unique opportunity from one of our project partners, which was a state coalition. They had a little bit of funding left over. They wanted to know what we wanted to have a conversation on and what we thought our needs were. Uniquely, during that same time, a lot of the women that we saw throughout the state that normally would come for just basic domestic violence, restraining order, how can you help me with this, child support, they were asking something different. They were saying, my husband has left the country and I haven't seen him for 2 weeks, or there's a lot of phone cards, international phone cards around the house, or it looks like he's sending money to somebody overseas. And I think that he's, married or engaged in a relationship overseas. So that was being reported throughout the state of Wisconsin. So we decided that in 2007 we would have a conversation. We were very intentional about who we would invite. We wanted to make sure that those who were most impacted were invited to the table. As you know, at that time, a lot of people who were experiencing this, there was a lot of shame in the community and nobody was talking about it. And so we were not able to even get Hmong victims and survivors to come and tell their stories at our first summit, our first gathering. We had to ask a young lady from California to come to be one of our face-to-face speakers. And so that just kind of tells you how much shame and how much silence there was in 2007. So as you can see, this issue has been ongoing for a long time, and we've been very aware of it. So we invited to the table victim voices, Hmong natural leaders, people who we thought that were healthy clan leaders, meaning that they had a reputation in the community of being fair and just, and people really respected them. So we invited them. We invited all the Hmong advocates throughout the state of Wisconsin, and at that time, even the Hmong advocates who were experiencing this issue did not say much about the issue. Why did we bring them together? We really knew that there was something happening in the community, but we weren't sure what it was yet, and so we decided to hold a summit. At that time, we started working with Bo, and we started working with Chick at the Institute. So as you can see, since 2007, from the first dialogue to the fourth dialogue, things had changed rapidly. So in 2007, we were trying to prevent what we thought was a trend. And we said, we have to address this. At that time, we didn't have terminology. We didn't have shared analysis. Everybody was talking about it in a different light. We had a lot of mainstream organizations and advocates wanting us to call it certain, wanting us to fit it into what had already been put out there. So a lot of people pushed back, saying this is trafficking, and at that moment we were not quick to call it that, because we knew that there was something different, and we knew that there was a cultural context to it that people didn't understand, that only Hmong advocates at that time really understood that if we mislabeled it, that we would miss an opportunity to engage our community in helping to create long-lasting solutions. And so the second summit, what between those 4 years, I wanted to tell you that from the first one of having to like bring somebody from California to talk about this issue to the last summit where we've had like victims and survivors, a lot of the advocates who didn't say anything about it, they were coming out with personal stories or they were directly impacted. And so we knew that it was no longer a trend, and in fact, even within 4 years that it had also become a norm within the community. But from the beginning, we were very strategic about always centering the voices of victims and survivors. Our shared analysis that we came out of those summits, we came up with some shared analysis, and those were that we understand and support healthy family reunification. As refugees, we want our families to be together. We've been torn apart by war, and many have not seen their relatives for a long time. So we were looking at a solution that would not stop us from reunifying with our loved ones.
Pretty good. How are you?
The second, sorry, somebody's phone is, can somebody mute their phone? Okay, and then the second thing was that we understood that if we did not come up with solutions that address root causes, we would only be putting Band-Aids on this issue, and in fact it would just evolve as we create solutions to put remedies to this problem, that it would just eventually evolve. And so we knew to look at the root causes, which was patriarchy, misogyny, globalization, race, capitalism, globalization. And then the other thing that we were very clear about from the beginning.
Training in Prescott. You were super.
I'm sorry. Can somebody mute their line?
And she's going to take the training. Yes, yes.
All guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
Hello?
Nancy,
am I on?
Okay. Yeah, you're on.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So this is what technology looks like. From the beginning, we knew that we could not do this work without centering the voices of those most impacted. So from the beginning, we always invited our mothers and our sisters and our aunties who were directly impacted by this. By now, at the end of 4 years of gathering, we also knew that a lot of the advocates who were advocating were also directly impacted. And so always we brought those voices to the table. The other thing that we really thought about was that we needed to create new leadership, and that would be the only the other opportunity for us to like really uplift and build Hmong sisterhood and new Hmong women leaders. And we wanted the solution to this issue to come from the community because we believe that the solution already lies within the community. The other thing is that we were really focused on the fact that we did not want to increase criminalization of our communities, and so that's why some of the solutions that you're going to see in the now really reflects that. And that the other thing that we had thought about was that throughout these years, what had happened was it seemed like there was a breakdown and the leadership was no longer leading, and there was no source of accountability for victims or no place for victims to really go to get any kind of help anymore. And so we also thought about like we had to come up with some new social norms or new moral compass for our community if in fact we needed to. The definition of, so as you can see, the definitions, the analysis, the terminology, all of this did not come out of one or two people. It came out of hundreds of advocates who really from throughout the state of Wisconsin and then later throughout the U.S., we all came together and said this is what we're going to define it and this is the reason why. It wasn't an overnight thing, and it had a lot of influence from people who were directly impacted. The definitions of abusive international marriage is that it can encompass all of these things. It could be somebody who is marrying an underage child or teen. It can be someone, we said that it's also abusive if there's a huge age gap because it's creating and changing the community and the makeup of our community. And it also impacts when someone who's 60 marries someone who's 20, there's an impact there because it leaves behind lots of issues, as you all can see. The other thing is that there was a lot of like forced legal divorces and forced marriages. And so the legal divorces, like they would actually ask their first wives to divorce them here legally, but they would still be culturally married. And then there's another term that was out there that had already been circulating around some of our other women of color communities, such as the South Asian community, the marry and dump. So it was basically they would go there and they would marry them, pay the dowry, and then sleep with them for about a month and be with them while they were over there, and then they would have no intentions of bringing them over, the new bride. And so as you can see, that some of it, a lot of it was driven by poverty. We spoke to one of the Hmong women leaders who is head of the Hmong women's organization in Laos called Vinyo Laos. And she said, you know, if you want to know why this is happening, if you want to know why the girls in Laos are doing this, all you have to do is follow them to their village and you'll understand. Extreme poverty. And so people started seeing this as a way out. What the impact in the community was devastating because, as you can see, there was an increase in sexual violence, increase in child sexual exploitation overseas, child abandonment of both the children here, of the first wives, and if they went overseas and had children over there, there was child abandonment on both sides of the world. Extreme poverty and exploitation. So if money is being sent to the second wife in Laos, that would leave the first family here devastated also and contributed to an increase in poverty in children. And abusive international marriage, after those years of us working, no longer was seen as a trend. It became a normal practice where people were no longer ashamed. So you would have like high-level official or you know, respectable, what you would think respectable clan leaders who would also be engaged in this. And I'm not saying that everybody was engaged in this, but the fact that it became a norm made it acceptable, and then it became something that people just did, and without being held accountable. Of course, there was a lot of human rights violation, especially those who are underage, and especially when there's force and sexual violence. But what we knew to be true was that we had to come up with solutions that really involved those most impacted. And we also knew that we needed to create terminology that our community could accept. And we needed to come up with a culturally specific analysis. And that analysis was that we could not, like many of our mainstream allies wanted us to label it trafficking. We could not label it trafficking because there were so many things that was not, it didn't fit into the trafficking terminology, nor the other thing that we knew to be true was labeling in Hmong community is very important. So if people start to see you as a victim that's trafficked for sex, that's very different than someone seeing you as a child who, even if you're young, as somebody who came over as a wife. And so those two basic terminology really defines who a Hmong woman is and actually has very different consequences. And so we knew that to be true. And we also knew that if we talked about it in a way that our community could not understand, so if we said you came here, you're a trafficked victim, you know, these are the remedies that we need to help you, if they do not see themselves as a trafficked victim and they see themselves as a family member or a wife, then they would no longer seek services from us because it was not fitting what they thought they were. And the other thing is we as advocates could not label them what they did not want to be labeled as. So then we started to look at some of the other solutions. We really thought about community accountability. Like, how do we hold a community to better standards? How do we start to shift the narrative around that? But also, we as advocates and as those who came to these summits decided that we would no longer stand silently, and we would start calling it out for what it is. So, for examples, we would go to funerals or family gatherings, and if we saw photos circulating or phone numbers circulating of those from overseas, we would say something to our family members, and we would say that's inappropriate. So we actually took accountability about what we would do. And then we also, part of lifting up Hmong women's narratives and Hmong women's leadership was about dismantling patriarchy. We wanted to value Hmong women and girls. And at the center of all of our fight, it was about gender equity, and it was we centered that in all of our strategies, along with centering those voices of those most impacted. So what Chick mentioned before at the beginning, throughout this whole process, what we knew to be true was that we needed to document this. So even from 2007, I was very I was very direct about how we would move forward, and one of those things was we need to document what we're doing, because if we don't tell our story, somebody else will, and they probably won't tell it the way that we would. And so we've been working with Chick and API-GBV, I don't know their new name now, but API-GBV Institute at that time for a long time, and we came up with this document that really talked about all of our gatherings. The sad part was that we did not, in 2012, we could not even put that out because we felt that the community was not ready. And so we kept that report to ourselves, but eventually we started saying, let's put it out in the community. I think people are going to, it's going to resonate with people. People may be ready to talk. So we started doing presentations at Hmong conferences, and then we got really well, it was very well received. In 2013, we decided that we would put it out virtually. October 1st, I was just like, okay, let's just put it out, see if people will come and people want to have a conversation. Literally within an hour, there was response from throughout the U.S. About this, and people really wanted to talk about it, and people wanted to know if there was an actual gathering in their cities. And so that's when Building Our Future was launched. We decided that our community was ready and that they were ready to engage in this conversation and that we were ready as advocates. So Building Our Future really comes from the fact that we understood that this is our problem, but that the solutions lie within the community, and that it's going to take all of us, and that it has to be organized grassroots by those most impacted, and that we were taking ownership for creating our own destiny, and that we were doing it through the leadership of Hmong women. So that's just gives you a little backdrop about how we came to these analysis and this movement, that it wasn't an overnight thing, and it wasn't that, Hmong women and advocates have not been working on this issue. In fact, we put a lot of time and effort into this issue. And one of the reasons why we had also been so silent for a couple of years was because there was so much there are so many advocates that also feared for their own lives, because it was not something that we knew that it was an issue that if we did not do it the right way, that there would be a lot of backlash, not only for us as Hmong women advocates, but for the people that we serve. And so the next Chai is going to really talk about what we've been doing and what's been working in some of those strategies. Chai?
Chai, I think you have to press *6.
I forgot to unmute myself. Hi, everyone. This is Chai, and here in Wisconsin, I actually hold two different roles. A lot of what I'm going to be presenting on is kind of stuff that I've been gathering from other advocates in Wisconsin and from personal experience serving victims and survivors. My two roles: one, I am the advocate outreach specialist for the Hmong Wisconsin Family Strengthening Helpline, which is a 24-hour helpline that is staffed by Hmong bilingual advocates 24 hours a day. And I believe we are the only helpline in the nation right now that is staffed by a Hmong speaking person 24 hours a day. So with that role, I reach out to all the Hmong advocates in Wisconsin and kind of keep us together, be the resource and kind of the go-to person for all advocates. Besides that, I am a domestic violence advocate, and I work in a mainstream white organization. So my program is a culturally specific program inside a white shelter. So let me just go to the right place. So when we started talking about abusive international marriages, we had to think about who were the folks that were most impacted. We obviously knew that there would be the wife here in the United States and the young girls or the girlfriend or the wife that he was engaging in a relationship with overseas. Then we also started hearing children come out and really talk about how they were being impacted. So we were seeing that with the abusive international marriage, unlike what we were seeing before, we were seeing one perpetrator and so many victims that came out of just one person's actions. We were seeing children here in the United States who were being neglected or were witnessing violence or even experiencing violence. We were seeing first wives here in the United States who were also coming to us for services. Second wives, we started seeing as we started servicing victims. Also, then there was the elders who were relying on adults to take care of them. So many times, if their children were engaged in these relationships, they also suffered with the family as well. And we considered them to be victims as well. We also saw that the community, because this issue had impacted everybody, pretty much everyone in the community had been personally impacted by it directly or indirectly, either through their spouse or a family member who were engaging in these relationships. And it was really hard for us to talk about this because even like Kajwa mentioned before, even some of us as advocates, we were impacted by abusive international marriages. And then as Hmong advocates, and some of us here in Wisconsin, being the only advocate at an organization or in the city, sometimes we found ourselves being one advocate and serving all these victims, victims who had a shared perpetrator. So then we also started looking at different ways that what abusive international marriage looked like. Did it look like the typical clients that we were seeing before who were experiencing domestic violence? And although there were so many similarities, we also saw that it was different, and we had to understand how different it was so that we could start serving the community. And before I go into the different forms, I just wanted to kind of share a story about what actually happened here at the shelter that I worked at, which, again, like I mentioned, is a mainstream white organization. Most of our clients who come through shelter are white. But when we had a Hmong client come through and started talking about her experiences with abusive international marriage, and this is like before we even started training our advocates here about what abusive international marriage was, it was hard for them to see where the violence was and how safety was a concern to her and how fit she would be for shelter. So then we had to really look at how different it was and the differences. one form of abuse that we hear a lot about with abusive international marriages advocates who work every day with women is economic abuse. Their partners were sending money overseas and not contributing to their households. Many times, what used to be a dual income household started becoming a single income household. Their partners were cashing out assets such as, borrowing from the life insurances or secretly taking money from their 401ks. Many of the clients we've seen, too, have been paying on their homes for many years, and some had even been close to or done paying for their homes, and they were experiencing seeing their partners going out, refinancing their homes for money to engage in these relationships. Lots of money used on phone cards, money being put aside and withheld from the family to save up for these international trips. Then we saw the physical abuse. Physical abuse increased with abusive international marriage when their partners started engaging in these relationships. And the physical abuse would be experienced by both the first, second wife, and even the children. Isolation. We saw isolation a lot especially with the new wives when they were coming into the country. They were coming into a country where they didn't have any relatives, or if they did have relatives, they were distant relatives and they lived far away. Many times these new wives would come and the husbands would keep them isolated as kind of a security for him, that she wouldn't leave him because she didn't have nowhere to go or didn't know where to go. So they weren't being allowed to go out to access education, to get jobs, to even communicate with other Hmong women in the house. And then oftentimes their only window to the outdoor world would be his children here and the first wife here and him. We also saw an increase in sexual violence. And sexual violence has always existed, but it never really been talked about as much until women started coming to us and talking about sexual acts that their husbands were asking them to perform and they weren't comfortable with. But they never necessarily labeled it as sexual assault or sexual violence or rape, because they always thought that was kind of their duty as the wife to perform those acts. So they knew it was wrong, but without labeling it that way, it was hard for mainstream programs or programs who didn't have culturally specific programs to see that she was actually really talking about sexual violence, and what she was talking about wasn't just another sexual act. The second wife was most of the time underage, so sexual violence occurs right away when he's engaging in or having sexual contact with her. We see a lot of rape of the first wife to reaffirm his manhood, rape of the second wife to reaffirm his manhood. He would be temporary paying wives, easy, no-contact sexual relationships, exploitation of children, girls, teens, women. There's the marry and dump, telling someone that you're marrying them and it's mostly just for the sex, and then not having any intentions of going back or making this person your wife. So it really, in a way, is just another way to solicitate sex in a different country with money. And an increase in STDs. Women were coming to us with STDs. They've never heard of this before. Many times they were being blamed by their husbands for the STDs. We were also seeing fraud. This was also new to us. And the families, women were coming to us because they were worried. Their sons were being forced into fake marriages so that their sons can bring over their husbands' new wives. they were being forced to legally divorce him and tell the court system that they're divorced and can no longer live together, but still being culturally married to him. And then also men who were engaged in these relationships were changing ages of the victims overseas. So when she's coming to the United States, she would be on papers 18, but in reality, she was 15. We saw increase in neglect of the children here in the United States. Children's basic needs weren't being met, neglect especially with incomes in the household changing. When he started withdrawing all his income, we saw neglect of even children in the homeland, children of that second wife. If she was to get impregnated and he left and she's there alone, and she doesn't have any systems there to help her collect any child support or so on. And then we saw that families were breaking apart. They were no longer building bonds, and that was both here and overseas. The women we saw, and it was hard for, and I can, even here at our organization, it was hard for them, other advocates, to see why she had to navigate so many systems and why she had to make decisions that she had to make. Well, Hmong women have to navigate so many systems. One is the clan system, and within the Hmong clan system itself, it's not just one clan that she goes to. It's still she has to work with her clan, his clan, and then the response that she gets from the Hmong community. While she's doing that, she may be in contact with the American legal system, so court, law enforcement, child support. Then Hmong women are still accessing their mainstream support services. Some may be involved with programs over at like Health and Human Services, the schools, making sure the kids are okay, and other community programs. Then there's immigration, and within immigration, maybe her own immigration status, and then also contacting like the U.S. Embassy to prevent her husband from going overseas or to find solutions that way. Another system that she navigates is her family. Because he's neglected the family, she becomes that person that really holds up the family, so her children becomes part of a lot of the decisions that she makes. And then, of course, Hmong support services. So even within Hmong support services, going to the local Hmong associations for help, interpreting services, and then local domestic violence services. And it was important for advocates to see the different systems that she was working with. Otherwise, when Hmong women would be going through one system to another, we started, mainstream programs started seeing her as a service hopper, going from one place to another to get services and not knowing which way she is, but she was going. But it was important for her to take these steps to make sure that she was leaving, or that to make sure her family was safe and her family would still keep as much of their living, the way of life as steady as possible. Some of the advocacy and support services that we've seen that have changed when working with victims of who had partners engaging in these abusive international marriages, where we started getting a lot of requests to write letters to the embassies. And so really going over with the clients what a letter to the embassy would be. Restraining orders. Like I said again, when women were talking about this, you had to really talk to them and help them frame their stories, or to help draw out important points for them to be able to get a restraining order. Otherwise, many times it was looked upon as just another having an affair or other and restraining orders weren't being granted because there was really no understanding of why she needed that restraining order. Child support, helping women be able to get some financial assistance from him while he was sending all his income overseas. Immigration, again, with the new brides coming over, sometimes her immigration papers were being taken away, or he had never filed for a green card, or when she finally left, she left without any of that. And helping her look at the process of gaining all of that back, we started to see immigration issues that we've never seen in the past with Hmong people coming into the United States as refugees. We really never had to worry or look at the different types of visa that were out there to protect victims of crime here in the United States. So that was something that was very new to us, and we started having to take a look at. Safety, it was a lot of educating clients and the community about abusive international marriages. Although we all knew it was wrong, we never really talked about it in a way to make it an issue, to point it out as an issue of being wrong. Everybody kind of just talked about it, and that was it. But helping our organizations and helping our community and the women that we were working with to be able to talk about abusive international marriage in a way that people can hear it, that it was an issue in our community and it wasn't a laughing matter. Safety planning started to look different for us. Safety planning involved all those other systems that she was navigating. Safety planning started to involve a lot more than just finding her a safe place to be or finding her a way out. It was a lot more planning, and it was consistent planning with victims and survivors. Sexual assault victim support. We started to have conversations about, okay, so there's an increase in sexual violence. How do we talk about, what terminology do we have to talk about it? And being comfortable to talk with clients about it, and being comfortable to give them the language so they can start talking about it with us. And then it was empowerment, empowering to support each other, and many times this was empowering the first wives to be that support for the second wife, or empowering the children to support the mothers, and empowering our community to stand up and stop talking about second wives as if they were a gift for a young flower, Hmong people say, that was being brought out to show. So empowering folks to really talk and stand up about that. So this, with this issue, we saw that it had to take more than just us as Hmong advocates and as Hmong women. And it was an issue that it had to involve more than just us, those of us in the United States. So we started looking at who else weren't we building with? Who did we have to start building with? And it was with everyone in all the other countries, Laos, Thailand, wherever these young brides are coming from, with men, with children, and with women. And it was a lot of leadership building, being able to bring everyone to the table and talk about it. Like we mentioned before, since everybody was impacted by this situation in a way or another, making it so that everyone could come and share their experiences, and really involving the whole community. And I think at this point also we stopped calling the women that were coming to us for help, our clients. We stopped calling them victims and survivors, and we started calling them sisters. So in Wisconsin, when we start saying sisters, we're not labeling anyone as victims or survivors. And it was important for us to have a network of advocates and people around the United States and in different countries that were doing the work. One example, we had a young lady who was brought here as a second wife from Laos, and when she got here and she ended up leaving her abusive relationship, she knew she could no longer stay in the state or even in a city or even the state, so she had to leave. But without having this network of advocates and knowing who's doing the work in a different state, we wouldn't have been able to connect her to someone else to support her and to make that transition for her to leave as easily. So some of the lessons learned, we learned that we had to create a new moral compass for our community because our old leadership had failed us and couldn't do anything for us anymore. We had to start building sisterhood, and sisterhood being both here and overseas, and really put those who are most impacted in the center. Increasing our leadership locally, nationally, and globally, and this has resulted in 2 international gatherings, building women's leadership skills so that women who were natural leaders have the skills to even come to the table and have discussions, and shifting power and dismantling power. So really giving power back to powerful among women leaders and those who are most impacted to make decisions. So as women, we must connect to each other and not just have messages about women's statuses delivered by men, but for us to be communicating directly between women. And I believe that's it for my part.
Great, thanks, Ty. So this is Bo again, and I'm sorry we couldn't figure out how to make the media work, but we have 2 links to videos in there, and they were PSAs that we created specifically for to talk about the impact of abusive international marriages on children, because we were finding that the conversation became very gendered, and there was a lot of debate about, men versus women, and that's not the dynamics in which is going to facilitate change and action. So we did a PSA on children, and then we also know that change is not going to happen, or this issue is not going to go away unless men are part of the solution. So we also did a PSA with Hmong men to talk about that. So you can take a look at those PSAs when you have a chance. I also want to share that, Building Our Future is a community campaign, and we are not a nonprofit organization. We do find resources when we need to come together, but all the advocates, some work as in the field of domestic violence, sexual assault, or other like child support services and things like that. But many don't. We are just concerned community members who are really taking this on to engage our community and to really think about kind of the cultural change strategies that need to happen. So we don't have a physical space, but we are very active online because that is one of the ways in which we can engage with our brothers and sisters overseas to talk about this. It's allowed for us to connect. And we also have a Tumblr site where we actively post information. And then we just put out a brief that tries to explain some of what Gajwa talked about in terms of clarifying why we call this abusive international marriages. How does it differ from sex tourism and trafficking and things like that? So there's a link to that for you if you're interested. So that ends our presentation today, and we have roughly about 28 28 or 29 minutes left, so we'll take questions if you have any. And I think I haven't been paying attention to the chat box, so I don't know if there were questions that came in, Nancy. But also, I'll just stop there and see if there are questions.
There weren't many questions that came up, but I guess we can engage in conversation as folks, can begin typing their questions. Let's see. I was curious about the ways in which, for if you have a message for advocates who may be in, for example, domestic violence organizations that work in Hmong communities, what would you want them to know, or what would you want them to keep in mind?
I'm sorry, Nancy. I started seeing questions. I looked at them and then I missed the first half of the question. Could you say it again?
I think,
sure.
Ty could probably answer that too.
Yeah, for advocates in domestic violence organizations working with Hmong communities, what would you want them to keep in mind as their, as a takeaway from this webinar?
Yeah. Chai, do you want to take that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
for advocates.
Or what would you want PV advocates to know? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the most important thing that we've learned here at the was women were coming and they were telling us sound right, like things that we didn't see necessarily fit in as our for folks we would that we start asking deeper questions and about issues such as international marriages. So we started to understand how violence may look differently from what we're normally used to seeing. And the other say to domestic violence advocates is to remember that there has been a movement that even if you're a Hmong advocate, I think you're a lot of.
Shai, I think your audio is coming in and out a little bit. Can you maybe reposition and speak closer to the mic?
Yeah. So to really reach out to who have been doing the work for a while to help you better understand. Like I said, either you are a Hmong advocate or you programs or you think your program can serve the Abusive International Marriages is a community, and it helps to have work for a long time.
Ty, you're going in and out, Chai.
Sorry, guys. I think something's wrong with my phone.
Okay, maybe call. Okay, so we have a question here that talks about both about what happens to perpetrators or abusers, and then how can we get them to be on our side to combat abusive international marriages. If we don't engage them, they will just keep building their lines of victims. And then there's another question here that is kind of similar, so we can answer that. I'd like to hear more about your work. Do you have partner organizations in Thailand? So maybe, Bo, you take the international question, and then let me talk about engaging men in these conversations.
Sure.
And so one of the things, so I'll answer to what is being done directly with perpetrators or abusers and how can they get involved. So one of the things that we really focused on from the beginning was we recognize that these are, regardless if they're abusers or not, or perpetrators, that at the end of the day, they were still our brothers, our uncles, our family members. And so, yes, there is an accountability there, but the accountability has to be transformative. What that means is that it has to transform communities, that there are the majority of the women that we work with and victims and survivors on both sides, those who have come here, those who are overseas, and those of the first wives, incarceration and calling the police is not ideal for them. even when they write to the embassy and they feel like they may get their spouse or their ex-partners in trouble, they frame it in a way that it doesn't criminalize anybody. And so I think that, like, it's not us that's doing that. It's just the women that we're working with. And we understand totally why, because we still have to be part of the community. These people have to still be part of the community. What we've done really well is that we've engaged, like, groups like Man Forward in Minnesota. They're actively helping us to, in one of the videos that you all will see, actively helping us to call this issue out. We are actively working with our brothers and sisters, brothers and uncles and the folks who are going back. We're telling them, like, you no longer can do this because we're not silent about that. This has been happening for 7 years. We made this commitment to our community to do that. And so I think that now, like, you're seeing more in the public media, but this is a long time coming. We've been organizing silently, and people don't know that, but I think that is a commitment that we've made. And yes, we are now telling our fathers, we are now telling our brothers. It's out there, and people know about us, and we also so I think that, and then the other thing is that we're also educating people overseas, and so Bo can talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe I'll just add to what Gajwa said, which is that the majority of Hmong men are not in this practice. This is a small handful, but the problem is that the men who don't do it are not vocal about what a good Hmong man is. And so when we work with groups like Man Forward, there's a lot of discussion about patriarchy and how that's harmful to men as well, because it keeps them in boxes. And so if they choose to do something that is different than that, there is consequences for them, right? Because people will, may say certain things. And so that is really important, which is, how can men who don't do this and think that this is wrong be more public and show up in solidarity? Because otherwise, so long as we keep being the people who are just the only ones saying it, then it becomes just a gendered issue, and it's not. It harms everybody, as we've shared. In terms of the global work, we connect with individuals, but also we work with organizations in Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, and kind of that whole region, because we know that it is really important, and that girls over there have the same dreams that girls over here have. And so, for example, Gajwa, myself, and Kaying, were very active in helping to support the founding of a Hmong Women's, the only ethnic organization in Laos that supports the educational and economic hopes and dreams of young, particularly Hmong girls in that country. And then in Thailand, and that's the organization called Sisterhood for Development. And then we also work with the Hmong Women's Network in Thailand and a social enterprise in Vietnam called Sapa. And so we realized that, there's many motives for why people do this on both sides, and that oftentimes we hear that this practice is being perpetuated by older Hmong men who have a lot of mental health issues, and so we often push back and say, if those are our community's issues, let's address them, but let's not excuse men from doing this in the community simply because we have a patriarchal kind of culture that people find challenging to bring up. And so we know that mental health and PTSD and, many people have those issues, but also we are seeing a trend of younger men who are, just in their 50s or 40s who are marrying younger brides. And so that very huge age range doesn't have to be underage. It could be, I got a call from the embassy from a young woman who's in her 20s, and her husband is in his late 50s, and that's a 20-year difference. And just their different statuses give him power, and they were in a very difficult situation, and she ended up back in Laos without knowing, understanding that that's what was going to happen. So I think that we have to also understand that, you know, this issue encompasses lots of issues, but the definition should help as well.
So the other question that is on top by Jennifer Lang is that, you know, what types of root causes are related to the issue of abusive international marriages, specifically among men? So I think that patriarchy and the devaluing of women and girls, not only in the Hmong community, but throughout the world, right? Because if you see abusive international marriage, we termed it that, we labeled it that in the Hmong community. But when I was a exchange student in Thailand 20 years ago, what I was seeing was it wasn't Hmong men who were doing it. It was like white European and U.S. Folks, right? These older men in Southeast Asia with these really young girls. And so I think that this is something that's been happening for a long time. It just so happened that in our community it started happening also. And so I think that it's good, important for people to understand that it is not particular to Hmong communities, that it is that it happens because men, the Hmong women that we work with, they said it best. They said, you know, it happens because Hmong men get to be bachelors for life. And I'm sure that you know, basically is similar in many, many cultures also. The other thing is, of course, globalization, right? Access to these countries. And then capitalism. I mean, there's so many, and this is how it's showing up in our communities. Bo, did you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just the value of our dollar, you know, we bring $100 here and it's worth, you know, 800,000 kip in Laos, right? And so, you know, that makes a huge difference. And, you know, one family there work a hard day of labor and maybe get $5, right? So, you know, those are the root causes that facilitate this happening, is men's privilege, our privilege as a first world country where we can travel freely. Those are, we often hear that, you know, the excuse of, well, you know, sometimes it's the young girls who cheat the men out of money, and we have to say, well, they are not the ones coming to this country, and all of those things, right? And also that in particular for our community where the transnational relationships are still very strong, because we are, you know, a community that still has many relationships over there, because, you know, those of us who got to come to this country still have many relatives over there. And so sometimes people see it as a way for them to be able to unite. And so, you know, issues like immigration is very important to us. If we have backlogs of, you know, 20 or plus years for families, then sometimes they see this as a way to give their, you know, their daughter who might be distantly related to the much older spouse a way to come, and they say, well, it's a way to help a family member. But that should not be the option. So I do think that there are many root causes that are tied to, you know, the power systems that are about us as a country, but also men and male privilege and patriarchy.
Bo, do you want to take, somebody just posted up that, I'm sorry, but why is this not considered trafficking? These brides would qualify for T visas.
We're not saying that all the cases, we're not saying that there are not trafficking cases, but I think we know that when some people have been given or told that they were trafficking, and then their cases were in fact did not, they could not qualify, or not, I shouldn't say qualify, you know, all those conditions were not met for trafficking, then it doesn't help that victim, right? Because so we say, you know, we support the survivors if they want to seek any legal remedies, because that's very important. That's the most important thing. But also that many of these cases, the husbands don't benefit from them coming here. And then also many of the young brides come here, and they came here, it might have been pressure or considered forced or something like that. But the State Department and the U.S. Embassy, does their due diligence. And so if they can, if they have gone through that process and qualified for a fiancé visa in order to come here, then it gets difficult to prove that they did not know what was happening, right? And so, the challenges for a young woman or the brides who come over to understand all of those things, I think is difficult. And the reason why trafficking alone is not does not define these relationships, because it is under the auspice of marriage that these situations are happening. We're not saying that there are not trafficking cases, because I am very sure that there are, but not all abusive international marriages are trafficking.
Yes, and the other thing that we hold true to, not just jumping into, pushing this into a mainstream narrative of labeling it trafficking, was that a lot of the people that we worked with in the past 10 years did not consider themselves being trafficked. Like, they did not consider themselves to be here for to be exploited for labor or exploited for sex. They actually believe that they're here as a family member, as a wife. And we have to respect that, because it wasn't just Hmong advocates who said, let's label it this, but the people who were going through it themselves were like, I'm not here as a sex trafficked person. I'm not here because he's exploiting my labor. Like, I'm here because I'm a wife. And what that does is that, whether we like it or not as advocates, what it does is it the little protection that they have left in the community, as a wife, they still have a lot of protection and they still have a lot of say. As a trafficked victim for sex or labor, that's a very different, those are very different consequences. Those labels come with different consequences. And so, we were respectful of our community and understanding that though there are remedies within the trafficking definitions and work that we can use to help seek justice for the women and girls that we were working with, that we could not label them something that they didn't see themselves as. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of people. Go ahead, Bo.
Oh, I was just going to say, we just did, as I said, a briefing about that. So I would advise just taking a look at that too, to help kind of clarify why we don't call abusive international marriages trafficking.
Yeah, I mean, Katie, we understand that a lot of victims and survivors almost never self-identify, but we also understand that a lot of communities of color do not, not communities of color, a lot of our folks, it isn't so much that they don't understand and think that that they are being or maybe going to be used as victims. Okay. So, yeah, I'm not saying that isn't true, but I can tell you that we, working from victim-centered advocacy, just know that a lot of them do understand, and they do know, and they don't want to be identified as victims and survivors, that they would, many of them consider themselves wives and family, So I feel like definition and labeling does matter. And so it's not something that we just said, if it fits into trafficking, great. The other thing, somebody asked also about, we are a U.S.-based movement, though we work globally. And then I think there's another one about, discussion about intervention to empower women.
Yeah, there was an earlier question about whether we had any events coming up. I want to say that this is an active week for us across the country. So in different localities, there have been conversations happening, and we try to pair that with Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So there have been conversations happening in California, in Fresno, I think, already had one, and then there will be one in Sacramento tomorrow, one here that is focused on men, and then one in Wisconsin, and then D.C. Or the East Coast, that D.C., Virginia, Maryland area already had theirs. So, so if you follow our Facebook page, you'll see the events posted.
Yes. And just to go back to, Katie, your clarification that you're looking at from an immigration standpoint, it, like Bo said, if it fits the definitions of trafficking, and those are very specific definitions, then definitely I think that people should use that remedy to seek justice for Hmong women and girls. We are totally in support of any kind of remedy that would help our community. All we're saying is that we've come as Hmong women, as Hmong advocates, we are coming from a place of, what is most restorative, what is most transformational, what is most healing, what is justice look like for our communities, particularly women and girls and those most impacted. And what we've learned in the past 10 years is that and now I can say in many communities of color who are heavily criminalized, criminalization and the legal system is just not one route that many of our people have chosen to take. And as advocates, we do what women and those who come to us for services, what they want. And I can tell you that, in the 15 years that I've been a domestic violence advocate on the ground or gender justice advocate on the ground, the legal remedies are very few and far between. And in fact, the reason why we decided that we would do a grassroots community campaign to change hearts and minds and create new moral compass for our community is just that we understood that there are some remedies that people are not going to go and use. And if that's not going to happen, then we need to look at other alternative solutions that is more closely appropriate to our people. And we are in support of all victims and all, both the women here, both the women overseas. We've been instrumental in decreasing victim blaming. We've worked in the past 10 years. I can tell you that just in my city alone, we've gone from the first wives here blaming the women and girls overseas to understanding that it is the action of their husband or their partner. So we've done, and we've gotten man forward, Hmong men who will step up. We have now people talking about this issue. We have terminology. We have analysis. And so we've done a lot of work around this. And so as allies in this work, we hope that you all will continue to have conversations with us so that, an hour is not going to explain the work that we've done for 10 years, but hopefully this will give you a glimpse of why we come out this way and why we have labeled it the way that we have and termed it. Bo, did you have anything to say? Okay.
No.
So, okay, so we only have like a couple minutes left. And I guess there's a lot of Hmong folks on this call, but there's also a lot of allies on this call. What Chai was saying before, I don't know if Chai's back on, but one of the things that is very helpful for our allies to understand is that we hope that you all as lawyers, as immigration lawyers, as social workers who are in this fight with us, we hope that you all take the lead, follow our lead in that we've been very strategic about how we've been talking about this issue, how we've been trying to present it to our community, and that it isn't something that is just coming out now. So we want you all to understand that it is in the best interest of our community. We are doing this work from a victim-centered place, which means that we value the safety of all those impacted, including our own lives. And so it's important for you all to also respect that, and that it isn't just something that we're trying to not name, or that we don't see the sexual violence in this, or that what strategies are we using, why it doesn't fit what you're trying to do, and that trust and believe that we are in this fight together, and that we've been doing a lot of social norm shift in our community, and things have gotten better. And so if you have any other detailed questions, or if you're working on a case and you need some help, like, as allies, we understand that you may not be the best one to maneuver all of the cultural nuances, so we're here to help you. The other piece for the Hmong folks who are on this call, we just want to thank you all for listening and really take everything back and share with people so that we can solve this issue within our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll just close out to say that I think as you can see, this issue is complex, and that oftentimes the burden is on really the victims and survivors to navigate multiple systems. And I know that everybody's goal is to serve the victim, but oftentimes we compartmentalize the problem so much that victims are not adequately served. And I think we would agree that this issue is not new, but Hmong women victims and survivors and impacted families are not being well served because there is so much disconnect in services, and so it really takes a much more holistic kind of approach, and that is also why it makes a huge difference to have well-trained Hmong advocates who can help the victims and survivors navigate all the multiple systems. And then also we know that when a victim and survivor comes forward, every time they are asking for help. So whether they're telling, a young child or an adult child, because we have seen many adult children who are struggling with this, come out in the, workplaces talking about the challenges with their parents and things like that. When impacted family members are asking for help, I think that a lot of people are just trying to figure out how to support them. And so now that you have a better grasp of kind of who is all impacted, I hope that you are able to help identify what could be done differently, and that for a victim and survivor, when they are sharing their stories, we have to take so much care, because if they are out in public, it is not just exposure to additional, or continued abuse by abusers, but there is a lot of community risk as well, because she will bear the burden of the blame and shame and isolation. And we try very hard to be supportive, but oftentimes, we are not able to do that. So I will just end with that and thank everybody for joining us today. Nancy, you can close us out.
Great. Well, it is 12:30, so I wanted to keep us on time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our webinar today and for an engaging conversation for the Q&A session as well. As we close out, you'll see a link. I think you'll pop up a short evaluation of our webinar and just letting us know your thoughts and what you plan to do differently. Thank you to our three amazing presenters and to Chick for kicking us off. And yeah, please stay in touch. If you have additional questions, you can reply to email by email to me, and I can forward it to our presenters should you want to be in touch with them. And yeah, stay in touch and hope to see you on our future webinars. Thank you.